Hi, this is Sam Gillespie. I write about real estate and politics for The Advocate. We're here in the Advocate conference room, and I'm joined by Judy Kumar. Judy,
hi.
Thank you for joining us. Judy's running for the District 9 City Council slot, and we're glad she's here.
And thank you so much, Sam, for having me.
So, Judy, I want to get right in it. Since the last City Council election 2 years ago, since we last had one of these, what do you think Dallas and the City Council did really, really right? And what do you think they did really, really wrong?
I think these past 2 years have been just really difficult. I mean, 2019 was fine for most people. Me, I was recovering from several surgeries. The fact that any government did what they did through coronavirus to keep people upbeat and inspired and still have a sense of community, I think that's to their credit. I'm sure there were a lot of debates over what should be done and shouldn't be done. And I don't envy anyone having to go through 2020 who was a politician. Having said that, I think there were definitely missteps. I think that our police needed more encouragement and support, especially when we were going through what some call peaceful protest and others call riots. The fact is, we were already short police officers. We had police officers who were, bedridden with coronavirus, and playing with whether or not they were going to have overtime was, I think, irresponsible and unconscionable. And having lived in places where they had shortages of police, I don't believe that's ever a good answer. Dallas, as you know, is about 443 square miles and 1.3 million people. I was born and raised in Washington, D.C., which is 43 square miles and less than 700,000 people. You have, depending on how you count it, between 2,700 and 3,000, and I say depending on how you count it because there's civilian force within the police department here. Regardless, DC has 3,700 police officers. So the math between the two cities is clearly off. And I think that the City Council needed to address that because we've gone from being one of the safest cities in the country to being one of the most dangerous. And that happened on City Council's watch.
Well, I want to dig a little deeper on that because my second question, just to review the facts, right? We had in the spring and summer, in the heat of the social justice movement, there was the cry to defund the police. You saw that phrase a lot. And there were some existing city council members that wrote a memo to the city manager, used different words. They used reimagining, asking for some different allocations. Subsequently, during the city budget process talks that I wrote about in the fall, the city passed a police budget, not defunding the police, but increasing the budget from $501 million to $560 million. It was a $15 million increase. So, there was a lot of dynamics there. Do you have any thoughts on, that, more thoughts about that string of events?
Well, so the thing is, by moving money from something like overtime to more internal affairs, or not internal affairs because that's a branch within the police department, but to more administrative things, they did essentially defund the police because the fact of the matter is we don't have enough police officers. When we came here in 2018, they already knew that at 2,800 they were several hundred police officers short for a city of this size. And so this is why they had been building up their police academy courses. What overtime does is it enables us to have people on the ground who are paid at that time. And so cutting it, but putting it elsewhere really is defunding the police. And it is reimagining. And there's a whole philosophy from activists, it started in New Jersey, you see it in California, you see it in Minneapolis. And the fact is, whenever they do that, except in one small town in America, which is not the benchmark for a city like this, what's happened is crime rates have gone up. Now, I know people also say, well, no, our crime rates are flat. Certain crime rates are flat. Break-ins in homes have gone down, but that's because most people are working remotely, and criminals are not stupid. They don't want to confront a Texan, many of whom are armed. At least in their home, there aren't. So they're much more opportunistic, and if you look at where the crime rate has grown, it's been those things of, people at Flagpole Hill being held up at gunpoint, the Exxon station near my house on East and Northwest armed robbery where the clerk was held up and a customer was held up. Audelia, you actually had a murder. And so all of this is happening because our police force is strained and thinned out, and they're also demoralized. I have a few neighbors who are police officers, and they really have been feeling abandoned by a lot of the statements that have come out of City Hall.
Thank you, Judy. So in your mind, what is affordable housing? What is your definition of affordable housing? How do you see that? And is there a path to your vision of affordable housing in East Dallas?
So it's funny that you bring that up. One of the reasons why we moved here is my husband and I are both in IT, and we left the Bay Area after 20 months, 3 weeks, 5 days, and 8 hours. And I really do count it down to that extra day that we had to stay there. We're fortunate that we both have good jobs, and after 8 years of being together, we finally bought a house, and we chose here in Dallas. And we had moved from DC to Minneapolis to the Bay Area, and then we chose here.
Mm-hmm.
It was always for his job, but here we chose. And while we could choose to live anywhere in the country, one of the things that really struck me hard living in California is renting is difficult, let alone choosing to own a home. And it made me angry. It made me every day I was angry because I would see people who were working in restaurants or police officers or educators having to have subsidized housing even though they had full-time jobs and living in small places, whereas essentially a 1% group could live in nice places and houses, and that angered me. And I don't think I was the only one who was angry. I think it leads to a lot of the social problems you see in California, and so I wanted to be in a community where people, regardless if they had multiple degrees like I do, or hadn't finished high school, but if they worked hard, they had a good chance of enjoying the fruits of their labor, and if renting a nice place or even owning their own home. And what's so amazing about Dallas is that the median home price here is $244,000, which places it within reach of working class families. And maybe, generational groups have to do it together, but it's possible. When we lived in Redwood City, which is right next to Silicon Valley, we had a 2-bedroom apartment that was 900 square feet, and it costs more than the 4-bedroom house that we have here, plus the insurance, plus the property tax. And I'm telling you this because we became friends with a married couple who had 3 children who lived in the same size apartment, and it was subsidized. And the father got up and he started work at 4, and then he would finish and pick up the kids from school, and the mother would, they never saw each other, and that's wrong. So for me, affordable housing means that people who are it's that working class people have a chance to work. Now, it's not just working class people. We also have senior citizens, people on fixed incomes who have disabilities, and I think it's very important for us to make sure that the pockets of Dallas that are affordable don't get gobbled up. And one of the things that's been happening around the world and around the country is 25% of the rental property in California is actually owned by Chinese investment companies. Most people don't know that. It puts an incredible price upwards. Vancouver decided to do a tax to make it more expensive for foreigners to buy. New Zealand banned it. And I actually do think that we need to have a heart-to-heart discussion with our developers, with our rental owners, and with the community at large, is how are we going to grow our city, because it's growing at 300 to 400 people a week, but who's buying the means to build this new housing?
So what policies do you think the city council can think about and enact that would create this path for your definition of affordable housing?
So the city council can either say we're not going to allow foreign companies to invest and build, or they can say we'll let anyone invest and build, but if they're from outside Texas or outside the United States, they have to apportion enough of their money to building affordable housing. So the other thing that's happened is in California, LA, where my sister lives, it cost $500,000 to build a 2-bedroom apartment. San Francisco, it's $750,000 to build the same one. And a lot of that also has to do with California's a very over-regulated state. I mean, you cannot put in a window without making sure it's the type of window. So I think that city council can come up with ways of setting regulations that allow us to grow the way we need to. We're looking at about 412,000 new people in Dallas in the next 20 years with the current growth rate. So we're going to grow, and that's going to impact a lot of things. But we shouldn't grow so much that the people who were born and raised here, I've met so many wonderful people, like my friends who are here with me today, and just block walking and things. We shouldn't grow so much that the people who've lived their whole lives here and their parents and their grandparents, that they're pushed out because they can't afford it. This doesn't mean that I'm against progress. This doesn't mean I'm against wealth building. It doesn't mean that I'm against, nice shiny buildings being built. That's not it. But it has to be done with a way of making sure that we don't leave behind people who've worked to be here, who've contributed to what makes Dallas great, while other people are also getting that.
So Judy, the District 9 ferry calls and says she or he is going to give you $10 million tomorrow. $10 million for District 9. What do you spend on?
Gosh, so many interesting projects that we could do. What I love about District 9 is it feels like a small town in that it's really a lot of wonderful neighborhoods, eclectic neighborhoods, small businesses, cozy. There's a coziness to it. And so I would actually like to partner with District 10, which is literally across the street from, just half a mile away from where I live, partner with them and DACAC maybe to work on creating an artist studio area, because again, not only affordable housing needs to be considered, but also affordable spaces for our artisans. We have so many very talented people here, and so there's been models in like Minneapolis and Old Town Alexandria where you have these wonderful studio areas. Now, this might sound like, why are you going to waste money on this? Well, DACAC actually was given $21 million by the city government back in 2019. And with that, they helped support over 200 artist organizations, which then generated $819 million in revenue, employing thousands of workers, brought in 3 million tourists, and my favorite part, well, not my favorite part, but one of my favorite parts is they returned $45 million in tax revenue. So when we as a city invest in our arts, we have pride in our community, we have revenue growth, we employ small businesses. The arts programs coupled with schools actually increases children's retention in school, like they're less likely to drop out. Crime goes down. It's an amazing thing. And I think, White Rock Lake is the gym of Dallas, but no one goes there when it rains. So if we have the arts part up there, then people will also still be coming up to East Dallas and saying, oh, well, it's a rainy day, but I'm going to go over here and see this. And so, again, it's kind of creating that this is such a beautiful, amazing space that everyone can grow. I mean, the fact is, I think that you can intelligently monetize things that you value. The other thing I would do would be to help sponsor things like festivals at White Rock Lake, and because it's very expensive to protect the lake, and it is our gym, and we do need to protect it because it keeps getting all sorts of stuff in it that cause it needing to be dredged. But we can't always pay for it from the city budget. So if we did things like have food truck fairs at different points of, that has some organizational requirements. It doesn't require $10 million.
You don't have to spend it all on one place.
I don't have to spend it, but I would kind of put it in, also just doing things where we can have programs to make our students motivated to work with small businesses and see what their future could be. Because right now with coronavirus, we're looking at 20% of our kids are not going to come back to school. And we already have, the DICD already has a problem where almost 70% of our students are at risk of dropping out at any given moment. So if we can find programs that keep them engaged, give them help, or maybe just the resources that they need, food security, Wi-Fi access, books, not nice, shiny, new renovations like the one going on across the street.
Okay. All right, well, thank you. Last question, Judy. There is a Mill Creek residential developer has requested a rezone for 320 apartments and 10,000 square foot of retail for where the lot and the local traveler sites are currently. So do you have an opinion on that development?
That's going to be a big fight, because that kind of change in a neighborhood like that one over there, it's going to change the quality of life, the pace and the driving and the traffic flow. But I think it behooves the developer and the residents and city council to really sit down and say, how do we envision this corner of Dallas looking like, not just now, but in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. My father helped build the subway system in DC. So when I was a little kid, I used to see these great big maps, and then decades later, I ended up working in the same office years after he had died. And it was amazing, because literally the map from 1968 was in front of where I worked. And it dawned on me, wow, this was a vision.
Mm-hmm.
This was something that took about 40 years to make happen. I mean, the first stage happened in 10 years. The change will happen one way or another. There's no way we can have 400,000 people move in this city in 20 years without changing some of our familiar landmarks. So the best thing to do is to make sure that we find ways of compromising and moving forward together, instead of people feeling like, I had no say in this. I think it's really important for city council members to listen to their constituents, but also help them understand what's at stake as a whole. We talk about this being a neighborhood or a district, but it's also part of a city and a bigger thing. And so what benefits one part of Dallas benefits all of Dallas.
All right, thank you, Judy. Appreciate you coming in.
Thank you so much, Sam.
I want to remind our readers and listeners and viewers that election day is May 1. Early voting starts April 19th, and encourage everybody to get out and vote. Thanks.